Hello, my name is Wilbert Banks, and I'm joined by Rolando Kahina, and our peer expert presentation covers religion. In this presentation, we're going to talk about the importance of religion in our current culture in our nation and around the world. Furthermore, we're going to look at the history of religion in this nation and its relationship to education. By doing so, we'll look at some important cases that help mend and shape the relationship between education and religion as we know it today. After we do this, we're going to talk about the educational approach to religion in schools. And we'll finish up by taking real situations that has happened in Texas schools and evaluate the results and the difficult decisions that administrators must make when handling religious issues in education. Let's begin. Religion and culture. Much of our culture is influenced by religion. The question that we must ask ourselves is this: how does cultural proficiency look when evaluating religion and education? What is the approach that schools can take with individual religious beliefs that are exhibited by students and staff? An important part of this is our ability to teach religion in schools. In Texas, various religions are discussed in U.S. history, world history, and world geography. School curriculum must distinguish between education and preaching religion. Teaching about world religions is a better approach because such instruction can help erase stereotypes of religious minorities and fill a pressing need to reduce ignorance about religion. Americans flubbed over half of 32 questions on religious knowledge survey given by the Pew Research Center. Religion does have a place in school as part of lessons meant to show various religions, place in history as well as their similarities and differences. And around the country, most state standards actually require schools to teach about the world's religions as part of world history or world geography. What's important here in this particular slide, several things. Number one, the importance of exposing students to the fact that there are different and various types of religions. So we do not want to raise a community or a generation that are ignorant about different religions. But the important separation part is, teaching those things without actually preaching religion.
While working on this project, I decided to interview one of our social studies teachers who currently teaches world geography, who has also in the past taught world history and US history. And my questions that I asked her was like, how do you approach the influence of religion when looking at history and how is it taught? Do you go in detail with like specific traditions that are inside each religion or different artifacts, or is it just kind of like really shallow? And her response was that they go in a pretty great detail with religion as far as what influences different religions and what they believe. She also made a statement to ensure that as this information is taught, that it's taught from a perspective that, students, that the religion is definitely not like downgraded or it's also not upheld as like the religion, So her big emphasis is ensuring that every religion has like its, importance in the curriculum and for the religions that they cover. Um, for her in particular, when looking at world geography, she said world geography is broken up into two parts. But the big portion of it that deals with, as far as it has a big section dealing with religion, is the cultural or the human geography. And that area focused on how the culture is mended by the religion, and that geography kind of sets the religion sets like where people live at because that's what they practice their belief sets and things of that sort. And that's a big portion of their curriculum. And it's like actually at the very beginning, and it's kind of tread throughout the rest of the curriculum. Furthermore, she mentioned the importance of it in U.S. history and world history, and the same thing there. It's just like when you get to different regions and and different impacts. The importance obviously of like how religion plays a big part in our society. She also mentioned the importance of what she called the big five religions, and that's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and then she sometimes covers Sikhism, depending on where she's at inside the units. So that was also important as well. So we can't really get away from religious talk in education because it is important. It's important that we understand like how religion has shaped and molded our countries. Um, and on top of that, if students are inquisitive and want to look deeper into certain religions that are taught inside school from that shallow sense, um, I think the important thing is that being unbiased as far as like showing, different types of religions, and so in a way that's truthful, that history supports and that doctrine supports and things of that sort. So that's important.
Now, it turns out that the separation of church and state was never mentioned in the Constitution or any other documents that were created from our founding fathers for the purpose of governing the nation. In fact, the first time that we see the actual terms separation of church and state was in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Danbury Baptist Church in 1801. In this letter, Jefferson expressed concern over the lack of their state constitution of explicit protection of religious liberty and against the government establishment of religion. His purpose of this letter was to let the church understand that the government was not going to get into their actual practice and therefore really limit them. But on that same note, the government was not going to promote them as well. So they had basically power over how their religion was going to be distributed, how it's going to be communicated, and things of that sort. And the church had its own identity that was separate from that of the state. The reason why this is important because if based off of history, many countries are based on the ideologies that are associated with religions. They are founded on religious belief. And this country decided to take a stance, a position that is contrary to that. So that is one of the great benefits of the separation of the church and state in our country and how we use it. So what is our approach? How do we actually take that aspect, the aspect of the government allowing for churches of different beliefs and different belief systems to work in this country? What's the best approach for it? And the answer to that is religious pluralism. Religious pluralism is defined as an attitude or policy regarding the diversity of religious belief systems coexisting in society together. What this means here is this: it's an attitude of you may have different individuals from different religions, and although those different religions have different ideologies, we do live in a country in which individuals can freely practice their religion and freely believe in their religion. And the ideal is that that conflict that could take place does not take place simply because of the fact that the government is not promoting either section for it. So it's being able to practice and believe what you believe while still respecting the religions of other individuals.
So as you're able to see here on the graph, you can see that religion population is great across the world. This graph here was a survey that was done um, in 2015, and it mentions that out of the percent of the world population, 2.3 billion are considered Christians, 1.8 Muslims, 1.2 are unaffiliated, 1.1 billion Hindus, 0.5 or zero point 0.5 are Buddhists, zero point 0.4 folk religion, zero point 0.1 other religions, and zero point 0.01 are considered Jews. So we're able to see that across the world, there's a great diversity, a diverse population in which we consider professions of faith or religious practices. Another thing is that in previous surveys by the Pew Research Center, they have shown that America, in this case, and we're talking about America, Texas, it's among the most religious of the world's developed nations. Nearly 6 in 10 U.S. adults say that religion is very important in their lives, and roughly 4 in 10 say they attend worship services at least once a week. But the U.S. Religious Knowledge Survey also showed that large numbers of Americans are uninformed about the tenets, practices, history, and leading figures of major faith traditions, including their own. So as you were able to see in the previous slide, the data of how religion, population, or groups are diverse throughout the entire world, America is, according to various surveys and various research, America is ever changing in religion, and the United States, in this case, is made up of a myriad amount of cultures, religions, and political beliefs. One of the things that stood out is that most Americans, they consider themselves, they call themselves Christians, and over 50% of those Americans claim to be Protestant and Christianity. And Eastern religions continue to grow in the United States, including Buddhism and Hinduism. Judaism and Islam are firmly rooted in America as well, even though their numbers are smaller. But through this graph that you're able to see, and you were able to see in the previous slide, and with this information, we're able to see that America is ever growing, is ever changing in this religious aspect. And so it's necessary that as a country and as a campus, as a school, and as leaders, we're able to address this situation as well.
So with this, let's go look at the influence of educational law and religion. In order to do this, we must look at 2 amendments: the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution and the 14th. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for redress and grievances. 2 clauses are established from this amendment. The first clause is known as the Establishment Clause. This clause states that the U.S. does not have any state-endorsed religion, nor does it write its laws based on any religious etiquette. The second exercise clause is the Free Exercise Clause, and it states that you cannot be prohibited from being part of a certain religion, although it does not mean that any religious practice is okay. Like, for instance, human sacrifice. So things that are obviously against the law here, dealing with humanity and morality. The 14th Amendment states that nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. The question that we have to ask ourselves with this, and we've seen this in educational law, is the identification of life, liberty, and property. And where does religion lie in this situation? So in order to see this, we must look at some jurisprudence of educational law dealing with religion. There are a lot of important cases that are listed on this particular slideshow. However, we're going to highlight some big ones more than others. And some of them we're going to kind of pass by, but you still obviously have access to them. You can see them on your screen. In 1943, West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. Although when you look at this case does not appear to obviously, as its main purpose was not religion at all. In fact, it was the free exercise clause that was based on the Pledge of Allegiance at school. In this, a school district forced students to not just stand, but also to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The students had to regurgitate the pledge. And the question that came about was the free exercise clause and how it's used. So although this particular case does not deal with religion, okay, the precedence for it is the standing that's used in many religious cases, especially those that were dealing with school districts forcing or having time or promoting time of prayer inside school. So this is an important case for that. In Everson versus the Board of Education in the Township of Ewing, that was in 1947. The description shows that New Jersey usage of tax money in supplying private religious schools with resources. Now, this case was a case that, if you look at it from the outside, it will suggest that the taxpayers' money that was given to a private religious school, okay, was in violation. But after further review, it showed that the private school provided resources that were non-secular, and it did not promote itself. So the school district supplied this private school with monies for educational purposes, in which they aided with the education of students and provided resources for students. And in the process, the school did not use its position in order to upheld itself as a religious facility. So it is an important case. It allowed for judges to review this case in a sense of saying, is it possible for a private school, especially a religious-based private school, to use public tax money, however, not promoting itself? McCullum versus the Board of Education, the court stopped religious people from coming into schools. And in this case, it was interesting because what happened inside this situation was that administrators and school board members were aware that they were very limited in their ability to present and teach religious ideologies and religious philosophies, which actually obviously barred down to them preaching to students. And their result was that they sought out individuals from the communities, be that preachers or pastors from the community, and they asked them to be spiritual leaders in the school. The courts did not support this ideal because it was something that was led by the administration. The administration coerced individuals to come into the campus and to preach to students. So it was definitely a violation of the amendment. This next one is very important, Engel versus Vitale. In this one, voluntary prayer in public schools was violated the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment prohibition of the state establishment of religion. A school district basically gave students a moment of prayer and it was designated a moment of prayer. And in some cases, a non-denominational prayer was said by a student over maybe the announcements or the intercom. And the problem with that, obviously, is that this entire ideal was promoted by the administration. It was promoted by the school district. So it was not something in which a student was praying on his own or a student was in the corner praying by itself. It was something that was initiated by, obviously, the school district. When looking at this set of of cases. There's two that are important, and the rest of them want to have you can look at on your own. Epperson versus Arkansas in 1968 invalidated an Arkansas statute that prohibited the teaching of human evolution in public schools. The approach here was that the Arkansas school district wanted to teach, if they're going to teach evolution, they also wanted to teach creationism. And it was clear that their purpose of doing so was to spread religious ideologies into the school district. And the courts took a stance on that and said that this is the purpose of this, the ideal behind this is religious driven, is theology driven. The Lemon versus Kurtzman test is important because the process in which courts evaluate religion and education from this particular case still holds today. And what it led to three questions being asked for cases that dealt with religious and education entanglement. So let's go see what these three questions were. The first question is the purpose secular? Obviously, our nation has adopted a secular approach, therefore not endorsing any religious views when creating laws and statutes. Is a law or a statute or a policy of a school district secular in purpose? That's the first question. The second question was, does the law advance or inhibit religion? In many cases, it's really easy to see laws that advance religion. But the other part that's important here are laws that inhibit religion, that actually, silences one particular religion over another. And then the final portion of this, does the act cause excessive entanglement? Okay. Now, this right here can be kind of confusing when evaluating, but here's what this means. If the answer to question number one is the purpose secular, and the answer is yes, it's secular, it does not deal with any particular religion. And then the next question, does the law advance or inhibit religion? And if that answer for that is no, it does not do either one. Then the last question is, how does the act cause excessive entanglement? And this is where the entanglement issue becomes part of a problem or a issue that we must consider. So let's say that, like in the last example that I gave you, that you have a private school. This private school provides resources for education. And let's say that it's been proven that these resources in viewing appear to be secular. They do not promote or inhibit any religion. But in order to ensure that they are secular and that they do not advance or inhibit religion, the government, the state, has to employ additional employees to research and to review the programs that are being instituted by this private religious institute. The issue that takes place now is that now extra resources from taxpayers' money are being used in order to evaluate a program that may or may not be secular. Just that alone causes excessive entanglement. In this case, we're looking at excessive entanglement by financial means.
Although there's a lot of controversy associated with how our schools approach education and religion, there are some benefits of allowing students to practice their faith in schools. Primarily, the fact that with many different religions being able to practice, that students and staff can become more aware of the cultures that are associated with different types of religions and how those students and staff are able to interact with those individuals with different religions or beliefs than what they have. Secondly, the students are free to express themselves, and religion and culture go hand in hand. So when students are able to express themselves via their faith, that means they're able to express their culture a little bit better as well. Furthermore, it increases community involvement. When schools are able to open up their doors to various community groups, and not just focusing on one, but many community groups. Uh, it's able to kind of build a community around the school, and you get more aid and more support on campus. Furthermore, it creates a community standard, some things that, as far as the community working together, as and kind of lending a hand with the school. So those are some of the benefits of being able to, have students practice in school. That's, regarding the situation of like the legality of it.
So practicing a religion or faith in schools is definitely a big controversial topic, and as you're able to see, there are some non-benefits, or we can say the negative aspect or side of allowing students to be able to practice their faith in schools. We constantly talk about how diverse our population is in our community, in our schools, in our campuses, regarding parents, children, staff members. And as you were able to see a little bit before, there was a graph that demonstrated that not everyone practices the same faith or same type of religion. And not only that, but there's other people in the world population who do not believe in anything or don't have any type of religious practice. So one of the non-benefits is exclusion of students. The fact that if you were to allow the practice of faith in campuses and districts, students who do not have any type of religious practice or any type of faith, then they would definitely feel excluded from the different types of activities. And therefore, this exclusion would target them for bullying or for prejudices. And therefore, students would not feel comfortable in entering the campus into the school atmosphere. And that's something that we definitely do not want. We want our schools and our campuses to be places where the students feel welcome, they feel embraced, and overall, they need to feel safe. Another non-benefit is that school is for everyone, and public schools are funded by those taxpayers of the community. So those taxpayers are our children's parents who are not religious and who do not agree with any of the religion that is being taught and or practiced at the school. Then they can definitely feel the need to highly oppose paying taxes, which then puts in jeopardy those religious practices or activities and programs that the school can be offering. And by allowing students to practice their faith in school, it could definitely contradict into education, especially topics such as history and science. Those tend to have be very contradictory with religious practices and religious beliefs, therefore causing confusion in the students. And it's definitely something that parents do not look forward to or wouldn't really accept, especially like I said, that certain topics that would be taught in school would definitely cause some sort of confusion or conflict with what students and parents have been believing and learning all of their life. Which then leads us to the next point, which is that fine line that needs to exist. And that is a very difficult aspect. There needs to be this very thin line. There's a thin line between teaching and preaching. And that is something that parents and students definitely fear, the fact that something that you're supposed to teach turns into preaching, and therefore parents feel as if their students or their children are trying to be convinced of certain religious practices and faiths, and those that's something that definitely parents would not feel very comfortable with, because they would have no control or say over this aspect. So those are some of the non-benefits that exist of allowing students to practice their faith in schools. Acceptance versus tolerance versus understanding. As you're able to see, these are three terms that are very important when it talks. When we are talking about this case of religion in schools. You're able to see the terminologies and their definitions. Acceptance is considered a fair, objective, and permissive attitude toward those whose opinions and practices, race, a religion or nationality, amongst other things, differ from one's own. So, the freedom from bigotry. Tolerant is a person's assent to the reality of a situation, and they're recognizing a process or condition, often a negative or uncomfortable situation, without attempting to even change it, protest, or even exit. Understanding is a process related to an abstract or physical object, such as a person, a situation, or message, where one is able to think about it and use concepts to deal adequately with that object. The United States gives its citizens wonderful freedoms protected by the Constitution. And some of those freedoms include the right to hold whatever religious and political beliefs, as we've been able to see, beliefs you wish, as well as the right to speak freely about them. Yet, despite these legal rights, many in America seem to think that only their beliefs should be allowed. This is where tolerance comes into play. In order for our nation to function, tolerance is essential. Everyone has the right to believe whatever they want, but they also have the right to disagree with the beliefs of others. However, tolerance prevents them from attacking those who have different beliefs. And here's why the ideal of tolerance frequently gets misunderstood. Tolerance simply means you tolerate. Um, it simply means you tolerate the beliefs of those you don't agree with. You don't attack someone. You don't use hate speech against them. Basically, you let them do their thing while you happily go do your thing. Unfortunately, many people seem to think tolerance actually means acceptance. While tolerance allows you to disagree with others or with others' beliefs, acceptance doesn't. If you accept another's beliefs, you are essentially agreeing with them and saying those beliefs are right. This doesn't work in a nation with as many different religions, political opinions, and lifestyles as in the United States. Many times, those beliefs and lifestyles contradict each other or have irreconcilable differences. In order to accept each of those beliefs and lifestyles, one would have to ignore those contradictions and differences. In order for American society to function well, each individual within it must accept what they can and tolerate what they can't. Anything else in a tolerant nation is unacceptable. So the question stands: what should schools do regarding this aspect of this subject of religion in schools? Should schools just sit with their arms crossed and completely ignore religious beliefs? Should they make the active effort to endorse all types of faiths and atheism? Or should schools just stay away from the discussion, not even touch it unless it becomes an issue on campus of the community? And within these questions, there's so many more that exist that go with this topic of religion in schools. And it's definitely a controversial topic. But one thing is for sure, if we're continuing to promote diversity and how schools and campuses need to accept these students of diverse backgrounds, diverse cultures, different socioeconomic statuses and different academics as well as standings, then religion, I believe, is one topic that cannot stay behind as well. As we've been seeing and we are able to witness, our campuses are great and in diversity. And so I think what should schools do? Well, I believe that what schools should end up doing is that they should create campus climates that welcome students from all faiths. We need to embrace everyone, regardless of what faith they share, whether it's the same as ours or not, whether you do have a faith or whether you don't practice any type of religion. Schools should also embrace this religious diversity because by doing this, it provides opportunities for students and staff to be able to build that relationship. And through this, they're able to learn and understand each other's differences. And lastly, it they need to acknowledge who students are at their core, because religion ends up shaping a student's culture, traditions, and rituals. So I think this is something that schools definitely need to do. So, since it's important that education and campuses create climates that welcome students from all faiths and they embrace that religious diversity, which includes also their culture and their traditions and their beliefs, it is necessary then to move beyond tolerance to understanding. Because to understand each other in that specific way, we need to be then less judgmental and accept that our way may not only be the only way. Two, emotion often gets in the way of objectivity. And three, no religious belief, ideology, or pressing need justifies the violation of another person's basic human rights. And I like this quote um, that I found that says that yes, we may have different religious religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one thing, and that is the human race. So that is very necessary for us to be move beyond tolerating to being able to understand. That is definitely what we seek as leaders, as campuses, our educators. There's many things that we don't understand because of the fact that we don't investigate and we don't expand our knowledge in regards to our students. And I believe if we were to able to do that, behaviors, different actions, different things that they do, we would be able to definitely understand them much, much better and meet the students' needs.
So, religion in public schools, K through 12. Schools may not advance any religion, but they must also not inhibit the expression of religion. So, with that said, what we're going to look at things that are permissible by schools, and then we'll look at things that are not permissible by schools. So, as future administrators, as future leaders of campuses, it's important that you understand that there is a line between things that you can legally do and things that you obviously cannot do. So, what is permissible? A student private prayer. So, if you have a student that's in the cafeteria and he's going to pray before he eat lunch, or he just wants this time so he can pray, or he even get another kid and like there's two kids from the same religion and they pray together, three kids. Okay, that is permissible. What is not permissible is staff or outside members invited by school personnel leading a prayer at the school. Sometimes you see situations like this in which maybe you have like a banquet that takes place and uh, an administrator would invite like the local community pastor and say, hey, can you start us off with a convocation for the students? Those things are not permissible. What is also permissible is that students-led religious clubs, such as FCA or Fellowship of Christian Athletes. What's important about these clubs is that they must be student-led, okay, and those students must determine what's going to take place. That means that how they're going to use money and what type of fundraisers and things of that sort are going to be concerned. What is also important is that there must be a staff representative, or what we call a sponsor. The staff representative or the sponsor is not responsible for providing religious information to those students. In fact, they are prohibited from doing so. But they are there to be a voice for those students in the case of having to set up a financial account or being able to use networks for if the student wanted a field trip somewhere, they have to find chaperones and set up bus requests and things of that sort. What is not permissible is student-led prayer during an event, such as a game. Recently, we know information about Santa Fe High School with the mass shooting, but they were also part of a big case in which what their regular practice was is that prior to football games, the administration had a voting process in which students voted on the student that was going to lead the prayers during the pre-game football games. And this prayer was said over the loudspeaker at the stadium, and they promoted generally a non-denominational prayer. This was found to be an illegal act because of the fact that it was still led by the campus. This is one of those precedents that we saw inside the cases earlier that was in violation. What is also permissible is religious works of historical and artistic significance. We cannot get around, like, for instance, the statue of David, and in looking at a lot of historical and artistic works of religion that are based off of, like, that literally shape our culture or also shapes our world around us. What is not permissible is the promotion of any religion over another, including the promotion of atheism over other religions. So what that means here is this as well. On that same note, if I am going to show artwork or historical significance work, if I consciously and purposely decided that I was going to only show artwork over Hinduism work, and I really avoided purposely other religions, those things could be, that's treading a thin line that could lead to the things that are not permissible by schools. Fleming versus Jefferson County School Districts, the U.S. Court of Appeals in the 10th Circuit in 2002, we had another example. The students at Columbine High School were asked to create tiles for a permanent art display to commemorate the shooting that took place there in spring of 1999. In that case, some students choose to put messages such as "God is love" on their tiles, and the schools refused to include these tiles in their displays, and the students sued the school. The results of this said that the Supreme Court ruled that if the school was allowed to use those tiles, then the school will also have to use tiles that had distasteful messages on them, such as "God is hate," or "there's no God," or "how could God allow this to happen," or, "kill murderers." So as a result, the school retained the authority to ban the tiles based off the fact that they understood that these tiles will become permanent parts of the school.
In October 2015, a Tennessee state legislator introduced a bill that would change religious studies teaching standards in Tennessee schools. Responding to some parents' concerns that their kids are being indoctrinated by Islamic teaching, the bill mandates that students cannot be taught religious studies classes before grade 10 in order to protect young children from feeling conflicted with what they are taught at home versus what they learn at school. The bill also mandates that the State Board of Education will ensure that no religion being taught in any history or geography class will ever amount to any sort of indoctrination. But what amounts to indoctrination? Does teaching the theology of Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism really making Tennessee kids that conflicted? Now, some scholars have proposed mandatory religious studies classes for American public schools. But obviously, judging from this Tennessee bill, this is very controversial. So the question remains, are religious studies classes in public schools a good idea? And if not, what should we do about the growing religious illiteracy in our society? In a previous video, I talked about the growth of religion in the 21st century. Pew Research has found that religious groups are projected to grow as a share of the global population by 2050. Islam in particular is projected to experience the most growth. Now, a lot of this is based on other population growth and fertility factors. Some of the most secular countries on earth are already below population replacement levels, so it's not like everyone is suddenly converting to religion. There are a lot of factors at work here. But interestingly, another phenomenon is happening at the same time. Even though religious groups are growing worldwide, most people simply don't know anything about religion, or even their own religion. Now, I'm going to focus on the United States in this video just as an example. About 40% of Americans can't name the first book of the Bible. Only half of Americans know that the Quran is the holy book of Islam. Less than half know that the Dalai Lama is a Buddhist. And embarrassingly, 10% of Americans believe that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And maybe some of you remember this hilarious scene in 2006 when Stephen Colbert stumps Congressman Lynn Westmoreland when he couldn't name the 10 Commandments, which he was fighting so hard to keep standing in a courthouse in Georgia. Now, this is what we call religious illiteracy, which is when people lack knowledge, sensitivity, and understanding of other religions. Religious illiteracy can also be described as lacking the basic knowledge of the world's religious traditions, the diversity of expressions within a given tradition, and the profound role that religion plays in social, cultural, and political life. Now, whether you're religious or not, whether you even like religion or not, you can't deny that it has been a huge cultural, artistic, philosophical, and political force throughout our species' history. And though you might deny it, religion continues to play a huge role in today's global society. So I think we would be a lot better off knowing a little bit more about this thing that pops up everywhere in our news cycle. Now, studying religion does not mean taking off your critical skeptic's hat. It doesn't mean being indoctrinated or saying all religion has truth to it. We all know that religion is deeply tied to violent episodes all throughout our species' history, and it should be critiqued. But it shouldn't be critiqued from a position of ignorance. So if this is the case, what are the benefits of boosting religious literacy? First of all, religious literacy just makes for a better functioning individual. It eliminates harmful stereotypes like Islamophobia, and it boosts your critical thinking skills. So when a politician says something about religion, you know they're being completely crazy or not. Now this leads to benefit number 2, a better functioning society. Boosting religious literacy aids in social cohesion, how we get along with each other, and how we as a society work together to get over shared problems. And a third benefit, which really is just a bonus, is you get to see how other humans have wrestled with existential questions. Who are we? What can we know? And what is the meaning of life? Now, I don't have any easy answers to fix America's religious illiteracy problem. Religion for Breakfast is here to help, but some scholars have proposed some big changes to public policy. For example, Dr. Stephen Prothero, a professor of religion at Boston University, wrote a best-selling book where he urges at least 2 mandatory religious studies classes in all public schools, one on the Bible and one on world religions. Now, of course, these classes would be teaching religion and the Bible as social phenomena, and not as indoctrination or teaching the religion as truth. Now, he argues that teaching the Bible as a text that is deeply entrenched in American politics and teaching world religions in general will make for a more balanced, tolerant, and effective public. But as we saw with the Tennessee state legislature, this is a very controversial idea. First of all, is it even constitutional? Now, public school teachers are technically government officials, and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution says the government cannot endorse any one religion. So the fear is, if public school teachers start teaching religion, they are somehow violating their students' constitutional rights. In fact, a 2010 Pew Research study found that 67% of Americans think it is illegal to read the Bible as a work of literature in public school classes. Now, a lot of this confusion stems from the Supreme Court's decision in 1963, Abington versus Shemp, which outlawed public school teachers from reading the Bible devotionally to their students or leading prayer in public schools. Now, of course, this doesn't outlaw the academic study of religion, though. Justice Thomas Clark wrote, "It might be said that one's education is not complete without a study of comparative religion or the history of religion and its relationship to the advancement of civilization." So the Supreme Court is definitely on the side of religious studies classes, even though most of America thinks it's illegal. But the second controversy is religion is just too controversial. Wouldn't public school teachers be a lot more comfortable to avoid talking about Sunnis and Shias, or to avoid talking about evangelical politics in America today? Because it seems like you just can't talk about these topics without it becoming too personal, either for the teacher or the students involved. But are these controversies a good enough reason not to have religious studies classes? Now, I happen to think it's a great idea. Not only do I run a religious studies blog, but I find religion weirdly fascinating enough to devote my whole career to it. But many of you watching this are rational voting members of democratic societies worldwide. So you should decide for yourself. Is religious illiteracy a problem? And should we encourage more critical and comprehensive religious studies classes in public schools? If not, what alternate ways would you suggest boosting religious literacy? If I get any good answers, I'll share them in the next video. But until then, thanks for subscribing and thanks for watching.
So after seeing the previous video, the following slides just touch on those pros and cons that they were able to list out. Some of the pros of practicing religion in public schools is that, one, it improves the morale. In recent years, public schools have been dealing with serious issues, including violence, teenage pregnancy, and drugs, amongst other things. Now, integrating religion into schools would definitely help improve better morale in students at a younger age, which then can allow the possibility of reducing problems in the public education systems. It promotes religious freedoms. The Constitution states that every individual has the right to practice whatever religion he or she would like, anytime and anywhere. It also allows for a well-rounded education. Schools do not only need to teach children just the basic things, but also help them become good adults. And putting religion into schools would definitely help education become well-rounded, because they need to learn how to become adjusted to the world around them. And it would inspire also harmony by the religious practices into in the classroom. Students would be given the opportunity to learn about different religions, different cultures, different practices. And that is something that we continually stress in our classroom, the need to accept others despite of their differences, despite of their beliefs. So these are some of the pros of practicing religion in public school. Just as there is a list of benefits to why religious practices should be allowed in school, there's also a list of cons that go against why a religion can or could probably be allowed to be practiced in schools. As you can see, the first point is that it distorts the notion that school is for everyone. Public schools are financed by taxpayers, by their money. And so if a child's parents don't agree with the religion of the majority, or they're just not religious at all, they don't practice any type of faith, then they can definitely oppose paying taxes that fund these religious programs and activities in schools, and they can find themselves in jeopardy. It also causes contradiction in education. There are topics that are taught in schools about certain religions that can definitely cause conflicts within the classroom and the student because of their religious beliefs, such as history and science, which are very controversial. And those can have contradictory lessons that can invoke confusion among those students and what they have believed all their life. It also excludes some students, as I mentioned before. If there are students who don't practice any type of religion or any type of faith, then they would feel excluded from these groups, and that is something that in a campus we don't want to build that atmosphere of segregation or being just a part of a specific group. We don't want students to feel left out. So students who practice a religion, well, that is different from the majority of the school, or they're not religious at all, they could definitely be excluded from different activities throughout the school day. And this can definitely get students to be targeted and prejudice and any type of bullying acts. And it distorts the separation of church and state. And so those who oppose religion in schools often bring up the separation of church and state, with laws put in effect in the country to further exemplify the First Amendment, and putting focus on religion in schools is regarded as a direct violation of these laws.
So now we have a real situation that took place in 2017. In a classroom in Liberty High School in Frisco, Texas, the Texas Attorney General's office had a case that was of importance, that was dealing with a prayer room in the school. And in this case, a group of Muslim students approached administration, and there was an issue in which they needed a place to pray. And without this place, they either had to, leave school for hours and miss curriculum and instruction. And there was some issues that are associated with it.
This is KERA News. I'm Stella Chavez. A classroom used as a prayer room at Liberty High School in Frisco got the attention of the Texas Attorney General's office last week. The office sent a letter raising constitutional concerns about the room. The Frisco superintendent called the letter a publicity stunt and says the prayer room has been in use for several years without complaints. Prayer rooms are just one way public schools in Frisco and across Texas accommodate students and religion. Tim Boyer was so unhappy about the prayer room at Liberty High that he went to this week's Frisco School Board meeting to speak his mind.
Liberty High School is not a mosque. It's not a synagogue. It's not a tabernacle. It's not a temple. It's not a church. It is a school.
The Frisco School District says it hasn't violated any state or federal laws by having a prayer room, and that the room is open to students of all faiths. It's not clear how many public schools in Texas have prayer rooms or designated areas where students can pray, but they are in some schools across the state and country.
You may hear it said sometimes that prayer's been kicked out of public schools, but in fact, what has been determined by the courts is that schools can't compel prayer.
That's Joy Baskin. She's the director of legal services with the Texas Association of School Boards. She says prayer rooms are acceptable. That's because legally, schools can give students time to pray, whether it's during free time or a lunch period. They can give students passes to leave class to pray or leave campus for religious education.
It's a concept that courts have looked at for many years. It's called release time. And it's the idea that in order to follow a tenet of faith, the student is briefly excused.
Time for prayer isn't the only religious accommodation you'll find in public schools. Students can wear a head covering, for example, or schools can meet students' dietary restrictions due to their religion. Baskin says all of this is okay as long as it's not an undue burden on the school.
There are students in Texas who have asked to be excused all day on Fridays, every Friday, in order to attend religious services on Friday. And most districts have considered that an undue burden because of the amount of class that the students would miss.
Liberty High established a prayer room in part because Muslim students were leaving school on Fridays to pray, and they were gone for about 2 hours. Kelly Shackelford is president and CEO of First Liberty Institute in Plano. It's a legal organization that focuses on religious freedom. He says the Texas Attorney General's office raises valid concerns, but what he's heard so far from the Frisco School District also falls in line with what his group supports.
It's fine to have an accommodation, a place for students where they can pray, as long as they're neutral, as long as they provide the same accommodations for other students, other faiths.
Shackelford says the more common legal battles involving schools and religion are when a school is trying to shut down religious expression. He says some schools fear that they're going to get in trouble if religion or religious expression happens in the school.
The law is that we don't want the government, which is running the schools, to push religion or try to force anybody into a particular religion, but to provide the students who have perfect freedom under the First Amendment to live out their faith.
The Islamic Center of Frisco has released a statement in support of the school district's efforts. The group says it was astonished the letter from the Attorney General's office came a day after the district's interfaith breakfast with religious leaders. Sabah Ilyas is a board member of the Islamic Center. She says people have been stopping by the Frisco Mosque daily to ask questions about Islam.
I have seen the dynamic of Frisco change. We used to be the only minority in our elementary school, 10 years ago, and now that's not the case. So the dynamic is definitely changing, and what I'm seeing more are people who want to know, and they're reaching out.
Ilyas says that face-to-face interaction is a better way to build understanding rather than sending a letter. Stella Chavez, KERA News.
So one aspect of this story is just the information. There's good information about legality or what do we believe to be legal versus what's illegal. But the other point is that your reflection as a future administrator on how would you handle this type of situation, while not limiting the students' cultural effect of their own individual practice of religion, but then on top of that, not entangling the school with that actual freedom. So ask yourself a question: how would I handle this situation in my future school as I'm the leader of that school?
In conclusion, we want to highlight some very important things about religion. Number one, we understand that religion in education and how it even floats around education is a very hot topic. It's a topic that brings up emotion. It's a topic that allows so for some individuals to become very frustrated. But it's also a topic that we cannot really veer away from. Throughout history, there have been many students that have wanted to express their religious freedoms in this country, and being able to do that legally, aside from the fact that our schools, our educational systems, are separate from that particular institution. So that's also very important. At the beginning of this presentation, we started with a story about a prayer room in Liberty High School, and how the school designated a prayer room for students. And if you listen to that particular story, the outcome was like the school was not in a violation of any type of, federal or state statutes or state laws, and they did it with an effort to ensure that students remained on campus and remained safe, and also had a place where they could feel safe. But then on top of that, they didn't leave school, so they'll still be present so they can learn. So when we think about this, some big questions always pop up. The first thing that's important is the First Amendment, and where does the First Amendment lie for all of our students and for us as educators, and how school plays a role with this. And with this, you get two statutes that were, or two clauses that were established from the First Amendment. The first clause is the Establishment Clause, in which the U.S. Shows that it does not have any state-endorsed religion, or that it's not written in any law that a religion will be supported, or that laws are not based on religion. And then the second clause is known as the Free Exercise Clause, in which you cannot be prohibited from practicing or joining a certain religion. Obviously, there are some parts of that are important, such as like you can't practice anything inside those religions. In today's time, the biggest thing for us, as far as when you look at those two things, is the ideal of religious pluralism. And that term was used earlier in the presentation. And it's an attitude or a policy regarding the diversity of religious belief systems that can coexist together in society. Meaning that schools' responsibility is to educate students, but on top of that, provide safety for students and things of that sort as well. The school definitely cannot endorse one religion over another, and it cannot really prohibit an individual student, from, expressing his religious freedoms. So like individuals that wear garments on their hair, on their head, or a student that wishes to pray on his own in solidarity somewhere. Schools really don't have a say with that aspect of it, but the question is, how can we allow that culture to continue and allow that student to still have that culture while still promoting, obviously, the culture of the school and the educational learning? And that's the thing that we always face, the things of trying to be able to balance these things, and also on top of that, not show a favor from one religion to another religion. So when it's all said and done, our real goal, our real aspect is, an aspect of unity, an aspect of like freedom with limits, an aspect of, being able to allow students to be expressive, but then on top of that, to uphold the standards and, the ability of the school to do its job, which is to teach students and for students to learn. So aside from the stats, aside from all the data and jargon and things of that sort, I think that the main premises, the bottom line that you kind of get from how religious, freedoms work, and on top of that, where the state lies at, where education lies at, is the final aspect of religious pluralism, of being able to allow students to practice. But then on top of that,
So finally, we have our references. Some things that are important as this presentation was closed out. Number one, I apologize for the length of this presentation. There was just a lot of meat, a lot of information that we provided, and we could have easily, probably did this in 2 hours just because it's so much information. So I do apologize for that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.